Alex, my second question was around the impact on existing providers and whether it might encourage or might prompt some to walk away from the sector, and obviously affecting sufficiency. It's a point that Mark and I raised early on. I mean, that was really kind of looking at it from perhaps existing supported accommodation providers and the additional costs perhaps as a result of semi-regulation is going to have. But actually, from what you're saying, I get the impression perhaps that it might undermine the case for some existing children's home providers, and that it sounds like it actually might enhance the business case for some to invest more in supported accommodation. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so. I think you run the risk of whether they're, supported accommodation, for want of a better word, may undercut children's homes. And, local authorities have got budgets. Birmingham is in strife, and I know many local authorities are struggling with their finances, and sometimes they don't have a choice. They'll have to go for an accommodation that is financially, more viable than a weekly cost of thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pounds. It does have to come into it. So I suspect that they'll have a 16-year-old that should be in a residential children's home that won't be placed there. They'll be placed in supported accommodation. They might only last a month or 6 months or 2 years. Ofsted won't know about it because they're not inspecting them.
No.
Mark, it was always a risk. Yeah, I mean, it was always a risk that we were going to end up with a two-tier, or that we may end up with a two kind of tier residential sector, with the newly regulated, semi-independent and supported becoming a cheaper form of residential. But as Alex quite rightly highlights, the pressure at the moment on local authorities financially. I mean, Birmingham's the big one, but there's Thurrock. There's about 15, 18, I think, at the moment that are at risk of collapse. Personally, our message to them is just get it all out of the way, and just because unfortunately, when you go around the country to local authorities, you've got commissioners that have a thankless task. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place, particularly those that want child-centred, good quality placements. But then they've got financial directors saying, okay, children's social care needs to save 9% this year based on no real method or formula. So my argument to them at the moment is just spend what you need to and just get on with going bankrupt. The government's going to have to bail you out, which is what they do, because the reality is that there's an inverse relationship between socioeconomic circumstances in society and demand on social care. And we've already got pressures right now. They're only going to continue to get worse over the next however long it takes to get through the next few years of what is likely to be a recession and heavy kind of demand on deprived families. So it is a risk.
Sorry, one other question I was going to ask around that is that when you've polled your members about these changes, what have they indicated it's going to kind of change any of their decision making, either immediately or in the long term?
No, I don't think at the moment the whole sector is paralysed, and there are not many providers that are prepared to move forward. One interesting kind of scenario that this does bring in is that there's not the same requirement for planning permission for supported and semi-independent as there is for children's homes. For those the audience that don't know, children's homes have to have a certain registration category in terms of planning. And that is increasingly difficult. You see across the kind of local news and across social media platforms, the NIMBYism where nobody wants to see a children's home opening on their road, which, to be honest, is a disgrace to me, somebody who lived in a children's home, because generally there's not the issues that people, it's the fear of the unknown. So there may be some good quality providers. We have a lot of good members that I know will be considering it, but a lot of it's from a child-centred perspective, though, so they can maintain the contact, so that they can kind of go down the route of staying close with children that they may have had for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But in terms of large numbers, we're not expecting large numbers of our membership to open up supported or semi-independent. They won't even open up more regulated children's homes at the moment because of all of the the external pressures, and everybody is just sitting back at the moment until there's some form of change at kind of government policy level.
Right. Rebekah, if I could bring you in there on that issue as well. Obviously, I wouldn't expect you to necessarily talk about existing providers walking away, but the kind of financial pressures that local authorities and tensions there that local authorities and providers are under, and obviously commissioners as well, obviously it puts local authorities in a very difficult position. Do you, in your day-to-day work, and obviously your work with BASRA, is this something that you see and you can understand, you can recognise, and are concerned about the potential pull factor there towards this new type of probably cheaper provision than the existing children's home providers like Alex operates?
Yes, I mean, we have long campaigned against the impact of austerity, and particularly we were very vocal when the Kerr review really offered, well, the government offered a pittance of £200 million compared to what was actually requested, the £2.6 billion in the Kerr review. So yes, we're very aware of that. I think going back to your question as to whether these regulations could make some providers walk away, it's entirely possible, and there is that risk. I would question, however, if providers are kind of at risk of pulling out or unpredictable, and there's that lack of accountability and kind of a commitment to children no matter what, then were they really right for the sector in the first place? Shouldn't the government be pivoting and actually encouraging local authorities to invest in their own homegrown accommodation? Because at the moment, local authorities are bound by very profitable accommodation that has a monopoly. And I think that actually the government has a responsibility here. It needs to foresee these risks that none of us in this room can do anything about, and prepare for them and invest. The fact that £143 million is being thrown at these standards without a contingency plan or without any of these risks being factored in really shows that its priorities are not in the right place. I would also say that if regulations are off-putting to providers, that in itself is worrying, because as I argued earlier, these standards are lukewarm anyway. They're very flimsy at best and don't actually offer a real lot. If you look at Ofsted and how stringent they are within school settings or foster settings or any other settings, the difference is absolutely vast. So it's a really complex area, but some thoughts from me.
Just coming back in on that, Derren. I think in terms of the walking away, I mean, just to clarify, this shouldn't be a debate about profit, not profit, private equity as such. The independent sector overall in children's residential care is about 15%, costs about 15% less than local authority provided care. Local authorities don't, want to carry that risk, which is why they don't open provision. And it'll probably be the same for this, but I think much of it's going to come down to what approach to enforcement Ofsted's going to take. So I've had a look this week. So far, out of about 1,200 providers of this provision, there's about 20 registered. So there's a long way to go.
Only a month to go to the deadline.
Yeah, they only have to have their applications in just to clarify though by next month. But I think potentially Ofsted may have wanted to see more than that by now, and which may be why they responded to your request for an article in the way that they did. But in terms of the enforcement, it's going to be really interesting, because I've been at several meetings where Ofsted are saying that they're not going to take enforcement action because they don't have the resources to do the criminal investigation that is required, because at the end of the day, the only route they have to go down for enforcement is a criminal investigation, and they don't have the resources for that. Right. So when they go out there, as I say, we don't know how many, we know that there's several thousand in these settings. We know from the work from Nuffield that several hundred have got a dole's order. Now, Ofsted have been very clear that a dole's order must be in a regulated children's home.
That's deprivation of liberty, just to be clear.
Yes, sorry, deprivation of liberty. And this morning I've been with Nuffield kind of looking at where we go next on this. But So if we look at the scenarios when they go out there, and we don't know how many have high needs, because Ofsted are saying there is rather than it being a binary of what is care and what is support, that it's a continuum, which doesn't help. I mean, these regulations have really put Ofsted in the biggest kind of challenging position, because when they go out, some are going to have to make a judgment call on what is care, what is support. But we do have a very kind of clear idea that there is about 600-700 of the deprivation of liberty orders are in these settings, and that's a massive problem, because they next month will become illegal. So we've got 3 scenarios there when Ofsted goes out to inspect, because that will be whether they inspect the actual accommodation or whether they do it office space, which they are. Then they will see the dole's order. So they 3 choices then. The provider says, okay, I will register as a regulated children's home. That means they have to get planning permission and they have to get a registered manager. About between 10 and 15% at the moment of homes don't have a registered manager because they're just not enough around. So there's huge challenges there. 2, they end the placement on the child. Goes back to the local authority's problem. Local authority won't be able to find provision for them at the moment. The sector is full, and Doles creates his own problems when it comes to living with other kids. How can you deprive one child's liberty without depriving the other children in the home's liberty, etc.? Or 3, the provider goes, I'm just going to carry on. What are you going to do? Now, the local authority may leave the child or young person there. So then the onus is on Ofsted to take the enforcement action, which they're saying they're not. So I think it's going to be a bit more complex about whether people walk away or whether people just carry on outside of the regulations to see actually what's going to happen. So it's a really complex scenario, and it's only going to get worse over this autumn and winter in terms of sufficiency.
Alex, thank you, Mark. If I could bring you in there, what do you make of what Mark's just said in terms of Ofsted's stance on that? I mean, it's I imagine that's not how you interact, or the interaction you have with Ofsted is not the same. I imagine they're much tougher than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ofsted, and rightly so, they scrutinise every document, every recording that you do in the home. They scrutinise. They require evidence for everything that matches the quality standards of children's homes, 2015 children's regulations 2015. You have to make sure you meet those standards. There isn't a choice. If you don't, they come down on you like a ton of bricks. And like I said, rightly so, it's very, very closely monitored and regulated for a good reason. They're children. I'll go back to my original point. Why isn't it the same now? Why have they brought this in, this wishy-washy legislation? Whereas, children under 16 are somehow different. It doesn't make sense.
How do you feel about the idea that these providers will be judged in a different way to you? When and creating this 2-tier system, as Mark says,
wildly inappropriate. Just make anyone under the age of 18. That the law is that you have to go into a residential children's home. It's that simple for me. I mean, there won't be any changes in regards to where children go when it's an unregulated placement. If they can't go somewhere, where are they going to go? Well, they'll go to an Airbnb. They'll go. I've known children to go live in a tent for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. That's my experience. I've seen it. I've done quality assurance inspections for local authorities, and I've seen the accommodation, firsthand, how dire it is. But and that's not to blame local authorities. They literally have nowhere for these children to go. So you've got stuck between a rock and a hard place, whether you leave them in a dangerous environment that's that all sorts of abuse is happening, or you remove them and put them in Airbnb or with a provider that isn't the best. But where else are they going to go?
My final question was going to be about asking you all 3 of you, what is the key benefit to these changes? But I get the impression there's none by the sounds of things, and I certainly I think that's there's a significant scepticism and concern around them. So perhaps instead, Rebekah, if I could go to you first, what one key thing would really improve? Would you like to see happen that would improve the circumstances or scenario around children's residential care at the moment? Because obviously, what we've just heard from all of you really is really a system that's kind of stretched the breaking point. What one key change do we need to have to improve things?
I think that to treat all children equally fundamentally, so in this case, the practical application of that would be to apply the Children's Homes regulations, which are far more robust, because when you look at this situation now, if you weaken one area of the care system based on one protected characteristic, in this case age, that then opens the door to other area, protected characteristics being exploited there. So what next will it be? Will children be denied care where they live based on gender, based on country of arrival, which I think under this government is very likely. We're heading in that hostile environment. When children enter the care system, often the only thing that they have in this world, if not a bin bag in their hand, are their rights. And so I'm extremely suspicious of any policy or regulations that weakens children's rights. And these proposals are a clear example of that. As Alex said earlier, children at 16 and 17 need more, not less support. There's an awful lot of adultification here in not actually recognising that under UK and international law, children are children up to the age of 16. How can it be right that a child is not able to buy a lottery ticket or rent a house on their own, or even get married until now recently 18, and yet by the same token be expected to fend for themselves living across the hall from drug dealers, as I was. Quickly going back to my point about diversity as well, the care review waxed lyrical about equality, diversity and inclusion, although it didn't give it not nearly the amount of due that it should. But in these settings, children are disproportionately from Black and marginalised communities, 46%. Also, boys are much more likely to be in these settings, even though if you look at the average UK population, people don't usually leave home till 24.5, and that number rises for boys and men as well. I think that we need to start centering children and not centering the market. What these proposals do is give the green light for the government to bend rules for situations where profit is involved, and it's legitimising something that actually previously was just an illegal loophole. So I suppose there's many things there, but my one thing would be treat all children equally.
Thank you. Mark, what one thing comes to mind for you? Sorry, I know there's many, I'm sure, that need to happen concurrently, really, to make a proper change. But is there one particular thing that stands out?
I think it's the local authorities need to be properly resourced to deliver their statutory duties, and actually above and beyond that, much of the problems that we face is due to years of austerity, as Rebekah highlighted, where local authorities now can only just about or struggle to deliver their statutory without the discretionary. We've lost, there's lots of kind of new stuff that came out of the care review, but family hubs, it seemed very much like Sure Start centres, but the preventative, the universal services that local authorities used to provide that were preventative, that I think explains the massive increase in kids in care. We have far too many kids in care. We're historical, unprecedented numbers of children in care. That we need to address that. The system, there aren't more foster carers to come. The residential sector cannot. We've reached the limit, so we need to try and work out how we keep children out of care, and that requires well-resourced local authorities.
Thank you. And Alex, if just finally, from a small operator like yourself's perspective, what one thing would improve the situation for you?
I think it goes right down to the beginning, early intervention to prevent young people entering into the looked after system. Labour implemented so many good policies and places where families could get early intervention, and then it was stripped away. That's the root cause of the problem. And then the mismanagement of money with local authorities, which often hits the news, prevents them spending the money where they need to spend the money because of the mismanagement of their finances. So really it all comes down to the government putting in policies, but also equally for the private sector. I think there should be a cap on weekly fees, flipping on the other side, because providers can dictate whatever they want. And at times, I know that not from my experience, because I don't do that, but I know that private providers can dictate that weekly fee, and there's nothing a local authority can do about it, because they need to place a young person somewhere, put a young person somewhere rather.
An imbalanced system at the moment.
Very. It used to be the other way around before COVID. Local authorities, you know, in essence, had that say so, and it was, well, no, we need to come sort of arrangement, and then contracts were put in between a local authority and a company, where silly terms and conditions were put in, where you couldn't serve notice, as we call it, on a young person's home, and for whatever reason. No one wants to do that, but within that contract, it would say you cannot do that without the consent between local authority and company. Well, that strips away the power of the registered manager. I could go on and on, but you know, there's just so many things that the very least they need to do is what Rebekah said, is treat all children as children and stop trying to treat them as adults.
Certainly a more equitable system. But thank you, all three of you, for your comments. And I know we've only really scratched the surface on a number of these issues. I'm sure as the registration deadline passes and we start to get Ofsted inspecting, we'll see how things then develop from there. Just to say thank you ever so much to Alex, Rebekah and Mark for taking part today. Much appreciated. Thank you.